I always master it for how it should sound good. If you are mastering for Spotify right now, 2 years down the road, it's going to be something else. So I just kind of feel like you have to serve the song in sort of like its own ecosystem at any given time.
That's mastering engineer Mat Leffler-Schulman. Matt's worked with artists such as Jon Batiste, Beach House, Nelly Furtado, and Mary J Blige. Today, we're going to get into what makes a great mix, but from the perspective of the mastering engineer.
Mastering is sort of the end of the road. Like, if you didn't get it good to begin with, like...
Some of his techniques for honoring the mix while still elevating the master to the next level.
If it's a mix where the vocals are a little bit hot and you want the like sides to be a little bit more, pronounced, you can compress the mid, but not the sides. So the sides like stay nice and like, doing what they're doing, but the vocal in the center gets a little bit like more tightened and in focus.
How a condition called synesthesia has become a tool for his mastering process.
Their shapes and colors, and they change based on frequency, intensity, and whatnot.
And why he's not that concerned with AI mastering.
There is clearly a market for that, and I feel like that market isn't the kind of person that is going to spend money with me anyways. A mix engineer who also masters their clients, that's where AI is going to take business away.
So whether you're here to learn more about the technical side of mastering or the business and the philosophies behind it, this one is for you. Stick around for my interview with Mat Leffler-Schulman. You've mastered number one top 10 songs for Grammy-winning artists, but I don't want to talk about mastering first. I want to talk about mixing. What is a great mix to you? When you pull something up on the desk, what makes you say, whoa, this is awesome?
Well, there's many things. And when I have sort of my mastering headphones or glasses or, that sort of focused on, it's always been difficult for me to be able to listen to the record as a whole. It's always been that way. Even since, I was a kid, I always listen to the snare drum. I remember, going to a show and finally realizing what drum the drummer was hitting, and that was the snare drum. I was like, that's crazy. But anyways, so what makes a great mix for me is when I am able to just completely forget about all those discernible individual tracks, and it's just like a whole piece that just works together. And I'm not sitting there like nitpicking, the bass, we should have pushed that up a little bit more. And, the sibilance is a little too much. So really, it's just, a mix that doesn't really distract you from anything. And, I have to pinch myself every day that I get to work with amazing producers and mix engineers. So it happens a lot where I really just kind of get lost in that mix. And, I know maybe the bar is really low, who knows? But yeah, it's a special thing to get lost in a mix, I think. But I certainly appreciate it.
Nice. So it's like basically when you listen to the music and there's nothing in the mix that bothers you.
Exactly.
Are you able to look past when something is maybe a little low end heavy or like a little harsh and you immediately know that's a solvable problem, but you're like, this is a good mix other than this like little tweak I want to make?
100%. And I think this goes back to how I like to work with communicating intensely with the mix engineer or the producer or the artist, just so, they'll let me know ahead of time, this is going to be a bass heavy mix, or the vocals are really loud in this one, but that's what we're going for. So yeah, I do think, though, if I don't have those conversations ahead of time, that if there is something that's a little like sort of outside of the norm, my brain just will focus right in on it. That might be parallel to how my synesthesia functions in my brain. So, with how my synesthesia works, it's like there's shapes and colors, and they change based on frequency, intensity, and whatnot. And sometimes, when that bass is really hot and it's like the greens are like really hitting me, like that can be pretty distracting.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you about that later, but now we have to talk about it because there's somebody sitting somewhere that's like, what are we talking about right now? So can you tell people what synesthesia is?
So specifically it's chromesthesia, which is where when I hear sounds, it manifests visually in sort of like my brain. It's almost like sort of like an acid trip, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that an advantage for you now, or is it a distraction? I guess you just said it was a little bit of a distraction if something's off.
It can be a distraction where it is very distracting is outside of music. Like if I'm at a club and I'm talking to a friend and there's just so much loud energy everywhere, frequencies and whatnot, that can get a little distracting. And really, like, I have to sit there and focus on talking to the person I'm talking to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought everybody had synesthesia growing up. I just didn't think that it was that unusual. And then I read an Oliver Sacks book. I was like, oh, so there's a name for this. And everybody doesn't have this.
That's wild.
And it may have been my gateway into working in audio. Who knows?
Yeah. I can't even imagine. Like, I don't even know how to imagine what that would be like. I mean, is it also pitch related, or is it for you it's more frequency related? So it is pitch related.
Well, and frequency. Yeah. I mean, don't they correlate? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they would. But I guess like bad singers, do they trigger something, or is it more about like a whole sonic context?
It's a whole sonic context. I don't feel like a bad singer. Are you talking about like an out of tune singer?
Yes, I guess. Like people with perfect pitch that go crazy when they hear like a siren or something.
Yeah, no, I do not have perfect pitch and nowhere even close to that. I have worked with a couple people who have perfect pitch, and I don't know that I envy them in a lot of ways.
Doesn't seem like it's fun.
It sounds pretty brutal. I mean, the people that I've seen that can do this, I'll literally, play a note and like pitch it up 3 cents and they'll know it. Pitched up 3 cents. They can tell you that. To me, that seems like a burden.
Totally.
But maybe to other people, synesthesia is a burden too. So, I don't know. Who am I to say?
Does it play into you knowing when a master is done? Like if I'm doing a mix.
100%.
Okay, yeah. 100%. So it's like a feeling. You're like, oh, this is what I'm used to.
Well, no, it's not a feeling. It's more than a feeling. It's for me, it's almost tactile visually. You just kind of know it's done, almost like, when you see your house is finished, like the building of the house is done. It's almost like that.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to like think of,
that's a good description, what you just said, because that makes sense to people.
Yeah. Or almost like an oscilloscope when you see something in phase and like the sine waves like perfectly lined up, but it's not like cockeyed. Like it's almost like that.
Also has to be kind of aligned with like your preference.
Correct. Yeah.
Like what you see as done visually is based on what you like.
Well, I don't know that it's what I like. It's what my mind likes and how my mind perceives it. I assume. I don't know if my mind likes it or not. I mean, I assume it does if it's lining it up that way. Yeah.
Right. That's an amazing tangent. I'm sure that'll filter through the conversation again. But I wanted to go back to the mix.
Sure.
So it sounds like communication is huge for you, and I've found that to be true, especially on the mixing end. What's your process like when you're communicating with producers and mixers about what they expect from you?
Well, some are pretty open with me from the get-go. They'll send me mixes, before we talk, and they'll ask me. They'll say, "Hey, is there anything here that stands out?" And being a mastering engineer or just being a third party, you get that luxury being able to hear something for the first time. And I feel like that's such a benefit to a mastering engineer as opposed to the mix engineer who's heard the song 1,000 times and they're just done with it. So I have those fresh ears. I can listen to it. I can tell if there's an issue with it. I can go back to the mix engineer and say, let's pull that bass down, or those guitars are just like too cranked in the side. Let's take out 3K3 and then we're done.
That's what I think a mastering engineer brings. Like, I don't really expect something to be like super different when I send a mix off, but I love the subtleties of like that person's taste mixed in with it. And so I guess, can you speak to how you ride the line of how much to do? Like if a mix is good, how much do you do? Or how little?
Well, for me, my instincts are always do no harm. Like, I really don't want to get in the way of the mix at all. Like, it's sort of like mastering is sort of the end of the road. Like, if you didn't get it good to begin with, like,
it ain't going to get good now.
I'm not going to make it any better. Like, a shit's a shit. Yeah, I don't like to get in the way. And there are mastering engineers that love to put their stamp on it, and that's awesome, but that's just not how I work.
I don't, without offending anybody, I don't like that at all. Those
Yeah.
people immediately go to my list of like do not calls
Oh, you're talking about the people who just change the mix.
that have a stamp. Like I guess if you're,
Right.
it's easier in mixing, right? Because if you want Chad Blake's sound, you go to Chad Blake and you know he's gonna do something crazy and it's gonna be nuts. But
Right.
you went there for that. When you go through the revisions and you have an artist and a producer, everybody's happy with a mix. I made it a little darker or thicker than like I normally would, and then I send it to somebody and they just like top 40 pop it. And you're like, but that's not what we gave you. Like it doesn't resemble what we gave you at all. Why would you do that? Anyway, pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I feel like you already made those sonic creative decisions when you were mixing it, when you were even arranging it or producing it.
Exactly.
So there's
Exactly.
no reason to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I do give the caveat though, if there's communication and the artist or the engineer wants it to be drastically different, if they want me to saturate with the tape machine, you know, but those are discussions you have, and that's where I'm very big on just communicating.
Yeah. I think it is necessary.
It seems so obvious, but I feel like in our industry, a lot of what we do, it's not rocket science. Like anyone can put a mic in front of a snare drum and get a good sound. Like you don't necessarily have to go to school for it. Like you don't have to be a mathematician. Like you don't have to be a NASA engineer. Like
Yeah.
it's not rocket science. So
Yeah. It's communication, it's vibe. We all have the same tools now. Some of us have more
we
expensive
do, we
tools,
do.
but
Right.
the playing field's pretty even. Let's talk about something weird.
Okay.
AI. We kind of talked about AI briefly before we got on, and we'll continue that. But there is stem splitting software that is becoming more prevalent. More people have access to it. Do you see mastering engineers using stem splitting software on a regular basis in the future? And if so, what's the ethical boundary about what to do? Like what should you and what should you not do? Since we're talking about respecting the mix, right?
Sure. And I assume you're talking about like isotopes, music rebalance, or
Or
something like that.
even logical split stems, right? So if I'm a
Oh, that's right.
at-home
Yeah.
mastering
Yeah.
engineer, I could rip them out of Logic, turn the vocal down, re-EQ the bass. Should I?
Totally. And I feel like if there is a specific reason to do so, like I just got this mix in from this band from DC. They loved the mix, but then they realized after they sent it to me that the snare drum was too hot. Like it was just too loud. So they said, "Is there anything you can do about it?" And I was like, "Well, yes, there is something I can do about it." So I did a little finagling, used the music rebalancer, split out the drums, and then I was able to compress the snare a smidge in that like drum bus.
Mm,
At the end of the day, they went back to the mix engineer to get it done correctly. But I feel like not everybody has a budget to do that. And I feel like for those people that don't have the budget to do it, it's a solution. It's a means to an end. It's a tool. And I think why not use it, right?
I don't disagree. Yeah, no, I think as long as the tool's used in the right manner, going back to people that maybe want to put their stamp on something, I guess I have a different perspective as the mixer.
And let's rewind too. When I had that mix with the snare drum that was too loud, the artist said it's too loud and they wanted me to fix it.
Yeah,
If it came in too loud, I wouldn't have touched that plugin at all.
same. Yeah,
Unless, that conversation just kind of came up naturally.
yeah,
But yeah, I definitely wouldn't do that without their knowledge. Yeah.
yeah. If they want stem mastering, they'll call you for stem mastering. And
Well, they'll call someone else for that.
are you
Yeah.
anti stem mastering?
I'm not anti-stem mastering, but I don't know that I'm good at mastering from stems.
Fair.
I certainly don't have experience in it, so I don't know that I would be able to do a good job.
I've never sent stems to mastering. I've never.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone would need it other than just sort of their process of thinking maybe it would be able to sound better. And who knows? I guess you could A/B it at one point, but who has the time for that?
Yeah, totally. Well, okay, let's go back in the AI rabbit hole with what we
Okay.
were kind of talking about off air before we started. I said that I thought AI would take your job before it took mine as a mixer, and we kind of went back and forth, and you brought up that there's a lot of value outside of the actual technical skills of mixing and mastering. So what do you think? That's the question. It's that broad.
So just on a personal level, I think AI is fascinating. I'm kind of into it. So let's rewind a little bit too. When I was like 25, I read an article, probably a real paper, and it said that after 30, you don't listen to any new music. Like you hit 30, and then everything prior to that is like sort of what you listen to for the rest of your life. And I made it a point that that was not going to become me. I wanted to continue listening to music, continuing to like know what was out there.
Yeah.
And, I don't like it all, but I don't like all the music that came out, when I was a kid. So, you can't like everything. But anyways, I sort of take that methodology with technology that comes out. So AI comes out, and I think it's an amazing tool. My wife's a programmer, and she uses it all the time to sort of set up these basic known things that like sets up these templates for her, and it saves her so much time. And I think that's a valuable tool.
Agreed.
I haven't figured out where AI would come in for me, where it could do that, like where it could set up, a Wavelab session and like line everything up and, do all the things and say, do X, Y, and Z. I don't think we're there yet.
Why do you not think that we're there yet? I mean, why do you think that nobody has figured out what that tool is? Because I agree with you. The things that I think would save me time, I don't see anybody making that tool.
Right. I mean, and I don't know how you would get that AI tool to like tie into the API of Wavelab. Like, I just don't know that technology of how it would work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be great if there was some AI out there that when I uploaded a folder to my Samply, that it would send an email to my client that, hey, this is, ready and here it is to download. That would be a great use for AI, but I don't know how to hook that up. I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah.
But in terms of, AI mastering and, what else? I mean, there's all these, like, they throw AI at everything. And I feel like
everything.
I just don't know that it's really in the software that we're using and how it's being marketed isn't necessarily true to what AI actually is. But I don't know. I'm not like an expert in that field in terms of plugins and whatnot. For the most part, my workflow is moving knobs around. So no AI other than just like Mojo.
Talking about AI, I'm surprised that Autotune hasn't advertised itself as AI vocal tuning yet. Because, I mean,
in a lot of ways, it sort of is.
Right? It kind of is.
I mean, what's really cool is like, I was watching a video and it was like, and this was years ago, like a couple years ago, and they were saying, write me a song that's like, in a happy key and lyrics about like the Smurfs or something.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it did that. It was pretty like rudimentary and like, it didn't sound incredible, but it was like, it was half believable.
Yeah.
Which to me is super cool, but also, a little too Big Brother and scary. And then also, you go into the whole intellectual property thing with like where it's learning all this information and getting all this information from, and then are those artists getting compensated for that? That's my real beef with AI right now.
Yes.
Yeah, and Jonathan Weiner talks a lot about that.
That's going to be the thing of like, what are all these models trained on? This might be partially incorrect, but I believe the EU passed something.
That's great.
Where by sometime in 2026, AI companies need to reveal or disclose their training data.
So does this mean it goes back?
I guess it would, yeah.
Okay.
So the kind of like, there must be enough money involved for them to have a couple years to sort the shit out and make it look like they're not going to get sued.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if you come out and say you trained your Suno AI training data on all of Spotify, like, that's not something that you want to put in writing in front of a judge.
That's not cool. Yeah, I'm not okay with that.
No, exactly. Yeah. I think there's an interesting case for having like local models that are trained on your own thing. Like I brought this up in another episode a few months ago, like if Max Martin had the Max Martin songwriting AI based on his own like preferences, that kind of stuff would be kind of weird, kind of fascinating. But that has nothing to do with our conversation.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating. That's a totally fascinating sort of idea. But I feel like we're not that far from that, honestly.
Right? Something that, you know, studies your masters and your preferences, and then you load it in, and there's the Mat version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can just click a starting point for that song. Is it kind of interesting and also disturbing at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I this is where I think like it could be really useful for a mix engineer. Like if there was a way that you could plug in AI so that it listened to all the individual stems, but then also listened to the mix and was able to like go back and forth and say, hey, I want these drums to sound like the Flaming Lips. Like, do that for me. And then it like sets up all the buses, gated verbs, rooms, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a tool that's like super useful. I would say I feel like I'm sort of walking back on this now because I feel like it's super cool and useful for someone who already knows how to do that. But for someone who doesn't know how to do that, I feel like there's a missed opportunity of learning how to do that.
Yes. I think just regardless of whether it's music a lot or not, that's going to be, I think, the long trail problem with AI is how many people just didn't learn how to do something.
And that, I guess that could be okay. Because it's like, we came up at a time, or I came up at a time where, you had a console, you had gain staging. There were all these different things you had to do.
Right.
But things change too. And it's like, you don't necessarily need to do all that kind of stuff if you're just doing something on your laptop in the basement. Like, you can still make it sound amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
I don't think anyone knows what the answer is. Hopefully somebody figures out before it's too late. But
yeah.
So, okay. Obviously, AI is a thing, right? It can do things for people. It can make your record brighter. There are websites that maybe, quote, master your record. Why does somebody want to use a person? I mean, I have an opinion, but what's the value of mastering multiple songs with someone like you?
Well, there's many reasons, but it also goes into mastering isn't just two bus processing, which right now that's all AI mastering does.
That's true.
Listens to your audio, it probably generates like the genre it's in, and then sort of puts like these brackets around it and says like, this is what we can do within these parameters of the genre.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's cool. I'm into it. And I think there is clearly a market for that. And I feel like that market isn't the kind of person that is going to spend money with me anyways. So I feel like a person like me isn't missing out on it. I feel like a mix engineer who also masters their clients, that's where AI is going to take business away. I think the other part of what mastering is, quality control.
Mm-hmm.
So like pops and clicks and, continuity and that sort of thing. I feel like that's something AI should be able to do. But for some reason, that's not what it's doing. Like, I feel like that's sort of the most boring part of mastering.
Yeah.
But it's super important. And I can't tell you how many records I get every day and there's pops and clicks all over it. And it's like, if I wasn't there, if a human wasn't listening to it, it would go out to vinyl. It would go out to all your digital distributions with those pops and clicks.
Yep. Yeah.
You would think AI should be able to figure that out. Like maybe Lander and all those automated processing companies do that now. I don't know.
But it definitely sounds like something that RX should be able to do.
Yeah.
It should be able to identify the clicks. I mean, it can already do so much manually.
That's what I pop it in RX. I mean, I can just literally like scan visually and I can see them. Like,
yeah.
That's not rocket science, but it takes time and it's something you need to do. So if AI could figure that out, I'm into it.
I'm down with that.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening, crossfades, people, especially on your like 808s and your basses, that's where these clicks are coming from. Just do some crossfades in Logic, okay?
I know. It's always like at the start of a new region of a vocal and plugins are all popping on.
It's the third chorus, copy and paste. The beginning of something is clipped off.
I know.
Attention to detail, which is like mastering. And mastering is attention to detail, in my opinion.
It's so much detail. It's hyper detail. Yeah, and then also the third part of mastering is assembling the data and formats so it can go out to the different distribution methods, like mastering for vinyl, mastering for cassette. They're all different sort of parameters that you have to work with. Different vinyl houses have different requirements.
Mm.
Spotify has a different requirement than YouTube has. Not that everybody does a different master for different platforms, but it's something you have to consider.
Okay, so you touched on the loudness, so we have to ask about the loud. What is your opinion on how loud to make something? Are you doing a streaming master? Or are you just making it how it sounds good?
I always master it for how it should sound good. Spotify is like a moving target. It's always going to be changing, and what you master for now might not. If you are mastering for Spotify right now, 2 years down the road, it's going to be something else. So I just kind of feel like you have to serve the song in sort of like its own ecosystem at any given time.
Which is what people have done for like
Right.
80 years, right? It was always, this sounds amazing, printed down to half-inch tape. This is the master. Right. And then that format is going to be transferred to CD or cassette or whatever it is. So
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe it's just the way knowledge flows through the internet now that people are hung up on it. But to me, I agree with you. It's whatever sounds best for the record is what sounds best for the record. You can't chase something that is going to change, especially tech companies. I mean, Jesus, could anything change faster than tech companies?
Well, I mean, yes and no. It's like they are kind of these like giants that take time to make these changes. But yeah, I just feel like if every once in a while I do get a client that says, "Hey, this has to be -8 LUFS integrated." I'm like, "Okay, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do that." But usually we'll have that conversation and I'll ask the question, why?
Yeah.
So I really understand what their intent is.
Yeah.
If I understand why, it might be that they're just using the wrong terminology, or there might be a better way to do what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So again, we come back to communication.
Yeah. What's your opinion on the level of mixes that you're getting to work with, like loudness level? Do you wish there was more headroom? Are you getting what you want generally on average?
Yes and no. And I think I've come to a happy median with making sure the mix engineer at sort of a bare minimum prints their mixes at 32-bit float. So that even if they are mixing into a limiter and it's hitting 0, if there are overs, I can always, pull it down with, gain, and there will be no like squared off waveforms. That's like the genius of 32-bit float.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. That's great. Okay. Let's talk about that. Can you explain that a little bit further for people that don't understand fixed versus floating?
Sure. So you have 16-bit, and I think it's 96 decibels of bandwidth.
I think that's correct.
From like the quietest point to the loudest point. And then you go to 24-bit and it's 144 dB from quietest to loudest. When you go to 32-bit, the decibel level is from like 0 to like 1200 or something. It's like something redonkulous. So if your mix goes over a dB or two, or even just like a couple little, half dB trickles, like you just turn your gain down a couple dB and everything's fine. So that's sort of where I am. I feel like a lot of people, I'd say it's 50-50. I'd say 50 people mix into a limiter.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I'll ask them, did you mix into the limiter? Because oftentimes if you take that limiter off, the mix will just fall apart. And it's pretty obvious when that happens.
True.
So if I get a mix and it kind of feels like unglued, so to speak, I'll ask them, hey, did you have a limiter when you were mixing? If so, please put it back on.
Yeah.
Which again, it's like sort of counterintuitive to, sort of what I knew and learned when I was hiring mastering engineers, decades ago.
Yeah. Well, it's, as a mixer, our side of the argument is that we have to compete with, crazy loud production refs. And so I chase the same thing with rough mixes where I get files and I'm like, are these even wet? And they're like, oh yeah, no, it's all wet. I'm like, what is on your master bus? Like, this doesn't even sound anything like the reference.
Right.
And so you end up chasing that to get back to that. And I don't like to I mix with a limiter on, but I do 80% of my mix without it.
That's great. Yeah.
But then I make sure that I do work a good chunk and I do all my revisions with the limiter, because if it's not going to be my limiter, it's going to be your limiter. There's still going to be a limiter.
And it's good to approximate that.
Exactly. You need to know how things are they going to break up? Is your low end screwing you over? And it's crazy how different things are. I used to not be an ozone maximizer fan, and I've recently left Pro L2 and gone to the maximizer because it feels cleaner to me in like a pop vocal sense.
I'm a big fan of the ozone maximizer, but I'm also a big fan of stacking limiters too.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you need to go loud, you know, letting, I guess it's similar to like, you have two hands, you can lift more weight with two hands than you can with one.
Yeah.
I'll do it where, I'm getting 3 dB of gain reduction on one. And then if I start going above that or below that, I guess, if I'm doing, 4 or 5 dB of gain reduction, that's when I'll bring in like the Vice limiter or, the L2 or something like that. I mean, there's so many limiters out there, and I feel like they all kind of do something different.
We're kind of talking technical tips, right? There was one thing I wanted to ask you. Width. Now, as a mixer, this is probably one of the most sensitive things for me. When a master comes back from a new engineer, if it's really wide and the center is phased or the center feels down, like if the snare and the vocal are quiet, like it's a trigger for me. I have a really hard time dealing with it.
So are you saying when the mix is too wide, like you don't like it, or?
No, I love a wide mix. I guess I should preface that what I was going to say is that I've been getting mixes back from most everybody that is mastering my mixes, including yourself. We've worked together. You did amazing work. People should know that. They're really wide, and I love it. But when the center gets fucked with, it makes me crazy. So A, how do you approach width? And B, what are the mistakes that a young engineer makes when it comes to trying to make something go wide?
Great question. So honestly, I rarely use the width button, or on my console, I have a width knob, which is absolutely fantastic. And I mean, it's one of those things where you can just use it, put it to 10, and it's like, it just gives like a little push to the sides, but it doesn't do anything to the center, which the Maslek, I don't know, he should make a plugin for it. He would make so much money because I don't know what it's doing under the hood, but it's magic.
Okay.
But, are you talking about like width plugins that like make the things wide, like the imaging thing in Isotope? Is that like what you're, or in an Ozone? Is that what you're talking about?
Less specific about the tool, more
Okay.
specific about how you think you can widen a mix up with the best result.
Sure. So generally, I don't feel like mixes need to be widened. I feel like that's also like a mix decision, unless the mix engineer says, hey, can you do something about this? Make it a little more wide. And oftentimes, what I'll do in widening is just work in the sides in the mid-side field. And oftentimes, like if it's a rock mix, I'll like make the guitars sparkle a little bit more, but only in the sides.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, if it's a mix where the vocals are a little bit hot and you want the like sides to be a little bit more, pronounced, you can compress the mid, but not the sides. So the sides like stay nice and like, doing what they're doing, but the vocal in the center gets a little bit like more tightened and in focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like mid side is a really great tool for that.
That's what I've found. That's the width that I prefer, is some mid side work. So for anybody that's unfamiliar, you're talking about compressors that you can switch to mid side and control the sides separate from the mid. I think at this point, everybody on the internet is hip to mid side.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I have an ITI EQ right there, and it's always in mid side, and it's like that's my go-to when we're talking about that sort of width balance where you need to sort of correct the equilibrium between the mid and the side. It's like it's such a great tool, and the ITI is pretty fantastic.
Nice. Okay. Well, okay, that's kind of related to my next question. I'm going to leave this really broad, so you can answer it however you want. Is there one tool that you couldn't live without? Gear or plugin or whatever?
Okay, I'm gonna go with gear because my Maslek MLA3 just does everything. It's a multi-band compressor. I use it as a de-esser. You can also expand channels. You can compress and expand at the same time.
Wow.
You can not do gain reduction, but actually use it as like a very wide EQ with changing the crossover points. What else can you do? It has input gain, output gain. You can solo all the different bands. I mean, this thing does everything.
That's crazy. How many buttons does it have?
I mean, there's a lot of buttons, but yeah, it's one of those things that I use it every day, and it makes my life so much easier. And I've never found a plugin that could do just what it does.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that box, but I'll be looking at it as soon as we finish.
It's fantastic. I feel
That's
like
cool.
everyone should have one. I mean, I wish everyone could afford one, but I ate a lot of ramen noodles to afford that one. Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually a perfect segue to my next baited question here. Tool you couldn't live without that's under $300.
Well, I feel like a tool that's free is a magazine called Tape Up.
Hmm.
I've been a subscriber since like episode 2 or 3.
It's a long time.
It's a super long time, and I feel like I've kind of gotten out of it, and I don't because it's more focused on recording engineers. So it's sort of like off my radar a little bit more. But there's the back page, and it's like Larry Crane, and he's sort of usually it's Larry Crane, and it's usually just sort of like you know how to keep your studio clean, or how to keep your clients happy. It's like sort of
Yeah.
it's like what you do on your podcast. It's like, talking about audio, but like also like the industry part of it and like
Right.
running a studio, like all the like sort of unsexy things in a lot of ways
That are more important.
that are totally important. And I always say it's like, you really don't even have to be a good engineer to be a good engineer. You just have to be able to talk to people and understand what they're going for. I
Yeah.
mean, not to like belittle what we do, because it's like what we do is important to a lot of people and takes a lot of skill. But I feel like if you don't have that ability to communicate with people, it's so much harder to succeed.
I think the only part of engineering that is difficult is figuring out what your sonic taste is and how that fits into the world.
Right.
And unfortunately, some people have a sonic taste that just isn't popular at the moment, but might be in the future. Like, I don't know. That's I think the hardest part, right? The tools or whatever. You can learn how to use anything. It's just EQ. Does it sound good? Compression. Does it sound good?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because, for a long time, I always loved those huge, bombastic, reverberant, almost gated snare drums, big drums.
Yeah.
And then, to Andy Schauf, he came out with a record and it was just like whop, whop. And I was like, what is this? Like, what are you doing? Like, this could be such a cool mix. And it was just like this tight little tucked in mix. And it
Yeah.
really bothered me. But then eventually, like, I came around and I was like, oh, I get it. Like, this is just an amazing song. He's a great songwriter. Like, and if the drums were huge, it just would have been terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've kind of come full circle with that, in terms of like what's popular now and what's not popular now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we were kind of on the topic of the not sexy parts of audio, right? Can we talk about the mastering business? You run a mastering house out of a non-music hub, right? You're in Baltimore.
hmm
Do you spend a lot of time working on your business as opposed to for your business? And if so, like, what are some of those things you do to grow the business?
To be transparent, I were a studio owner producer for like 20 years. And during that time, my mastering, more and more people started to say, "Hey, can you master this record for me?" And it grew and grew and grew. And then eventually, for all intents and purposes, I left that studio and then I started my own mastering exclusive studio. I used to advertise a lot, but I haven't advertised anymore. I did a little bit like on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram, but I found with advertising, it's sort of not sort of the target market of what you're going for. I feel like it's sort of like the people that it grabs are the people that are going to hire AI and lander to do what they're really looking for, and they're looking for sort of like bottom dollar
Yeah, price
and just
shopping.
boom, boom, boom. I need it done like today because it needs to be out on all the Spotify's this Friday for some reason.
For some reason, everybody's waiting for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally. Totally. So at some point, I just didn't have the time to do it, and I also didn't need to do it because I just got too busy for it. Which is the good problems to have. It was one less thing I had to do. But I do feel like one thing that I do is I'm active on Instagram. I post from time to time, and I look at what other people are doing. I think that might have been how I found you, is on Instagram.
Yeah, I think.
And it's like sort of I've always been a big fan of like building a community. Back in the day, I worked at Warner Brothers, and I worked in their marketing department, and I was building a community for this band that I was working with, be it like online message boards, and like I would just sort of like massage conversations. And, a lot of that translates to how I work as a mastering engineer and how I either, continue to work with the clients I want to work with, or work with, larger clients, bigger clients, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, just sort of putting myself out there, I think is a critical step. It's not sexy.
Not sexy.
I kind of enjoy it. So maybe it is sexy. I don't know. But I know a lot of other people don't enjoy it. And I think it can be inauthentic
Very easily.
for some people. And I think it can be inauthentic if you're not into it. And I think people can see through that.
I agree. I mean, at this point, this comes up on every episode of the show of late. And it's just like, it's how people get to know you, right? It's
Right.
not just album covers anymore. It's like, how does this person interact? Do I want to get on the phone and talk to them about mastering my record or mixing my record? I think I like this person. Let's hit them up. Because we don't like when you were at Warner Brothers, you were in an office, right? There's people around, you talk to them. Like now I'm in my backyard. Nobody comes over here.
I know. I'll have a client come over, maybe once a month, maybe a couple times a year, but I'm a Gen Xer, so I like to text, and I'm cool with texting, and I text often, but I pick up the phone, and I feel like you can really just learn people just by talking to them. And you can also, tell if they're just full of shit too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And whether you want to work with them, regardless of whether they want to work with you.
Exactly.
And it's funny. Something about the internet makes everything transactional, right? I was one of those people that kind of, for a long time, avoided the phone call and avoided the Zoom meeting. And then I think the podcast and the pandemic kind of changed that for me. And now I'm like, down, let's talk.
Yeah.
But if I sit down with a potential collaborator, whatever, and have a conversation, I mean, it's almost 100% that I'm going to do that gig if I want to do that gig.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can have a conversation, you can understand what they want. Like you're talking about in the beginning, communication. It's like, I cannot give you what you need out of your mix, or I can give you exactly that, and I would, emphasize this. And they're like, perfect.
Right.
And then you can move forward. And so, yeah, it's big. Talking to people authentically and getting to know people is like way better than just responding to emails.
Totally. And some people aren't cool with that, and I'm fine with that too. If they just want to text, like, I'm totally cool with that. There's one client that I have that only sends me audio messages. Like, they talk into their phone, and it's just like a recorded audio message.
Yes.
In Instagram, but like that's how they communicate. And it's like, cool, whatever floats your boat. It's awesome.
1 minute at a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know you've got a busy day. I will let you get back to it, but I've got 2 questions. I know you listen to the show, so you're probably familiar with what they are. Maybe you prepared, maybe you didn't. I guess we'll find out. So was there ever a time in your career that you decided to redefine what success meant to you?
Oh, of course. Yeah. And I did not prepare this. So yes, there was a point when I first built my first real studio, and this was like in, I don't know, 2005. And both my wife and I were like, if we can get a band that's like super successful in 5 years, like that's going to be it. But if like we're a studio and we don't get a big band in 5 years, like it's probably not going to happen. And And I was okay with it either way. And it's like, we sort of like got in between that, I guess, in a lot of ways, which I think is okay. And I think at that point, I realized that, I'm not going to be, the next Butch Vig or the guy from the Bleachers. Like, that's not going to be me. And I'm okay with that. I became a working engineer.
Yeah.
And to me, if I can put food on the table for my family, we can go on vacations once or twice a year based on the work that I'm doing, like, to me, that's success. And I'm totally okay with it. I love it, in fact. It's great.
I'm with
Yeah.
that. I'm with that. That's like, I think there's I don't know when you got married, but when I got married, that was like, it was an immediate change. It was like, oh, I love what I'm doing. I don't know why I was frustrated before.
Right.
Like, I make money, I make my living working in music, and now I can carve time out for my family at the same time. Like, that's like a huge win.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's like best
Yeah.
of both worlds, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm with you on that. So, last question is, what is your current biggest goal? What is the next smallest step you're going to take to go towards it?
Oh, I mean, I think it's a lot of what I'm doing. I feel like, and maybe this has to do with more of the unsexy parts of my job where I'm constantly looking at places to streamline
Mm,
sort of what I'm doing and just making the process smoother. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm sort of paying attention to like how I can carve out an extra minute in terms of like, sending the data to a client, like the master to a client. Like, how can I sort of automate that or cut and paste data and make it more simpler so that I have more time to work on like the things that I like, playing with these knobs.
yeah.
So that's sort of my goal, I guess. I mean, everyone has the goals of just like working with bigger artists and, more successful mix engineers, but, definitely that. Of course, I'm not going to say no. I mean, I just did a record and Chuck D's on it, and that's like fantastic. Like, 12-year-old me is like, what?
That's
But,
awesome.
it's just as awesome as working with like a local band here in Baltimore.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And, I'm working in a field that I love. So, yeah.
It's funny that that's what your goal was optimization, because I was sitting here thinking, I was like, I should have asked him about automation and like systems before we ended. I love that. Is there anything that you do right now or anything that you wish you could automate in your system? Like you mentioned the WaveLab thing.
Right, right. So there is an app I use called Samply, which is how all my artists listen to my masters and preview.
It's a great app.
It's fantastic. I love those guys. They are just, I'm the person who like picks apart everything, and they are just so stupidly patient with me. Like, I don't get it. I don't get why they put up with me. Like, I just don't. But they're fantastic. It's a great app. But there are all these things where I'm doing the same thing every day. I'm sending out a link to a client with a mix or a master, a single, an LP, like vinyl sides. And it's like that process is sort of the same, except for like one little link, and then the subject is different. So I'm using this app called Zapier,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm trying to like figure out how to get it to work with Samply and work with like my databases to do all that in the background for me. So yeah, technology is great, but it's also like you almost need another like engineer or tech person to sort of like walk you through that process.
Yeah, like if you're outside the code world, like just far enough, it can be confusing because I definitely hit walls. I love SoundFlow. I love Samply.
Right.
And yeah, being able to just know just enough scripting to figure that out. But that's where ChatGPT is been great. I've taken things out of Samply, like taking code, not Samply, code out of SoundFlow, pasted it in ChatGPT, said, this does this, I want it to do that. And then it just spits it out and I paste it and have a script. I'm like, this is amazing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think ChatGPT could actually write that script, but it can
Right.
analyze it if you tell it what it does. And everything that it spit out, 2 or 3 things for me have all worked perfectly.
You would think it would be able to write the script because my wife does that with like JavaScript all the time. She's like, make me a JavaScript that does X, Y, and Z. And like, it'll just do it.
I think there's aspects of SoundFlow that it wouldn't know.
Right. Because I think it only goes back a couple years too. And SoundFlow, I think, is a newer app.
Yeah. Now, if it was just a straight Apple script that you were maybe going to fire in Keyboard Maestro, it probably could write that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, an excellent nerdy ending.
Perfect for a mastering engineer.
If you enjoyed this one and you want to dig deeper on the truth about loudness normalization standards and where this whole -14 stuff came from, then check out my conversation with Sam Fishman.